Wow! And it is all over! You ready? Let's go!
What's up, Fight Fam? Welcome back to another episode of All Day MMA Radio. Today's episode is a little bit special because it is Saturday, April 13th, which means UFC 236 Holloway vs. Poirier 2 goes down tonight in Atlanta, Georgia. I wish I could go. I'm in Orlando, so it's not too far away. I would love to go. It's a great card, but unfortunately that's not in the cards for me. So instead, I'm going to talk about it. I'll be watching about it, and right now I'm going to give you guys my predictions of how the main card is going to go down. In my opinion, we are in for a treat. Now, as I mentioned, it's called Holloway vs. Poirier 2 because the two have already fought, although it was something like 7 years ago, a long time ago. Both fighters have improved a ton since then. And I also believe it was Max Holloway's first fight in the UFC, which was in 2012. And since losing to Conor McGregor in 2013, Max Holloway has won an incredible 13 fights in a row, which has undoubtedly planted him at the top of the mountain at featherweight. Also during that run, he dethroned someone who was widely known as the featherweight king before Max, a guy you may have heard of by the name of Jose Aldo. Now, as I said, Max Holloway's won 13 fights in a row. All of them have been at featherweight, but this interim title weight fight against Dustin Poirier will be taking place at lightweight. With that said, Max Holloway is a massive featherweight. So moving up to 155 pounds, in my opinion, should serve him well. Possibly may even give him more power, which is definitely a scary thing for his future opponents. And something tells me if he looks great in this fight, if he absolutely just runs through Dustin Poirier, that we may indeed see Max stay at 155 from here on out. And hopefully his next fight, according to Dana White, if he wins, will be against Khabib to unify the 155-pound belt. Now that, my friends, is a fight myself, and I'm sure a lot of you others out there watching would love to see. A fight, in fact, that almost happened not so long ago when Max took the fight against Khabib on short notice. There was some weight cut issues. The doctors didn't let him finish cutting weight, and ultimately Al Iaquinta stepped in, and we all saw how that went down. But personally, I'm kind of glad the fight didn't happen because I would much rather see how Max looks at 155 first a very game opponent such as a Dustin Poirier. If he looks amazing, I'd love to see him get a full camp before he gets his shot at Khabib. Now, saying all that, Dustin Poirier also fought the majority of his career at featherweight. And he had a pretty good run. He had some good wins, some tough losses. But ever since moving up to lightweight, the dude has looked amazing. So I'm definitely looking forward to this fight. Like I keep mentioning, the two fought before. It was Max Holloway's first fight in the UFC. Dustin Poirier ultimately took Max to the ground, and he won, I believe, via armbar. So it was a good fight while it lasted, at least the stand-up portion, but Max was very inexperienced back then. He was something like 20 years old, super young. He's still really young, still in his 20s. But they've both grown a lot since then, but in my opinion, Max has grown more as a fighter, and I definitely think he's absolutely one of the best fighters in the UFC, probably the best featherweight ever, and possibly one day he might be the best lightweight ever. That remains to be seen, but this fight is definitely one to tune into. You do not want to miss this one. I guarantee it's going to be action-packed, and it will keep you on the edge of your seat the entire fight. So stay tuned for that one. That's our main event. But before we get to the main event, let me go ahead and cover the rest of the main card. Now, starting us out on the main card is a light heavyweight fight between my boy Ovince St. Preux, who was also a University of Tennessee alumni. In fact, I believe he played linebacker for the Vols. I myself actually went to the University of Tennessee way back in 2008, so there's a little bit of connection there. Fun fact, I also trained a few times at the MMA gym that I believe he still trains at. Now, OSP's opponent is someone by the name of Nikita Krylov. Now, admittedly, I don't know too much about Nikita, so take this prediction with a grain of salt. And as I already mentioned, I'm a little bit biased towards OSP with the University of Tennessee connection. and he's a really fun fighter to watch. His submission game is crazy. It's fun to watch. Some of his submissions are extremely creative, so OSP is always a fun dude to watch. He's very unorthodox with his striking. You never know what kind of strikes he's going to throw, and you also never know what kind of submissions he may be able to pull off on the ground. So, since I don't know too much about Nikita, I can't really speak too much on him as a fighter. I do know in his last fight he lost to Jan Blachowicz. I think that's how you pronounce it. I feel like I always mispronounce his name. He lost that fight via arm triangle choke, but prior to that fight, he won his last 4. 3 of those were by either knockout or TKO. So the dude obviously does pack some power, and he himself also has his fair share of submission victories. So it should be a somewhat evenly matched fight. It should be a fun one to watch, whether it ends up being a stand-up fight or whether it goes to the ground. So that should definitely be a good fight to start out the main card. Now, both fighters lost their last fight. OSP lost in a somewhat dominant fashion against a guy by the name of Dominic Reyes, who I'm also a pretty big fan of. He didn't look too great in that fight, I'll be honest, but I have a feeling this is going to be a good rebound fight for him, and my prediction is OSP gets it done by way of, I'm going to say he's going to pull off some crazy submission in the 3rd round. Moving on to the welterweights, we got Alan Jouban versus Dwight Grant. Now, I know a lot about Alan Jouban. I've seen a ton of his fights. I like his fighting style. I liked his fight versus Mike Platinum Perry in particular. But on the flip side, I don't know too much about Dwight Grant. So I'm trying to give you guys my best insight possible. I have been watching fighting forever, but there's always new guys that are going to come along that I haven't seen too many fights of and I'm not that knowledgeable about. So I'm not going to pretend I know more than I do. Doing a little bit of research, doing my due diligence, I did find out Dwight Grant was a contender on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. He did win that fight to get his shot in the UFC, in which he lost his initial UFC fight against Zach Otto via split decision. And then he's had one more fight in the UFC since then, and he was victorious in that fight. He won via TKO with 1 second left in the 1st round. So all in all, the dude isn't all too experienced. He's 9-2 as a pro. This will be his, I guess you could say, technically 3rd fight in the UFC. Like I mentioned, he did have the fight on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, but I don't think technically that counts officially as a UFC fight. So this should be a pretty big step up in competition for him. Alan Jouban is a pretty seasoned vet. He's had quite a few more fights in the UFC. He's 16-6 as a pro, and I am picking Alan Jouban to win via unanimous decision after 3 rounds. So there you go. That's pick number 2. Moving on to the 3rd fight of the main card. Going back to the light heavyweights. And this one features former University of Alabama football player Eric Anders versus Khalil Roundtree Jr. I'm going to be honest. I don't know exactly how I feel about Eric Anders. I feel like if you guys watched his last fight, which was against Elias Theodorou, I think is how you say his name, I'm not a huge fan of Elias. I'll just throw that out there. I cannot stand his style. He to me is pretty much the definition of a point fighter. But for whatever reason, he just keeps on winning. He keeps on proving me wrong. For whatever reason, he just seems like he's a hard guy to beat. I thought Eric Anders was going to be the one to finally stop him, knock him out, TKO him, something, but he lost a split decision like many of Elias's opponents seem to do for whatever reason. But anyways, my apologies if you are a fan of Elias Theodorou. Just something about him, his style, I don't know, it drives me crazy. More power to the guy, though. He keeps winning. He's successful, so can't hate on him too much. Anyways, moving back to this fight, I don't know how I feel about Eric Anders. He had that fight, like I just mentioned, against Elias, which I just felt like if he had to pull the trigger more, had to win for it more, I think he just sat around way too much. I think he could have easily won that fight. So it was a very frustrating fight to watch. His fight before that, he got finished by Thiago Santos, which, you know, you can't blame him for that. Lots of people get finished by Thiago Santos. The dude hits hard. So I haven't really seen too much of him aside from those 2 fights. And his opponent, Khalil Roundtree Jr., I was impressed with him because he absolutely destroyed Gokhan Saki, knocked him out, and Gokhan Saki is one of the best kickboxers of all time, so I didn't see that one happening. But then in his last fight against my man Johnny Walker, he got absolutely flatlined by an elbow. But once again, just like you can't blame Eric Anders for getting knocked out by Thiago Santos, I can't really not blame Khalil for getting knocked out by Johnny Walker, because Johnny Walker has looked like an absolute monster ever since joining the UFC, and he's been knocking out fools left and right with all kinds of creative strikes. If nothing else, both dudes have the potential to hit hard. So I don't think either of them has the best cardio in the world, but I don't think it's going to matter. I do not think this fight will go the full 3 rounds. This is a tough one to call. I think whoever lands first, easy to say, right? Sounds simple. But whoever lands first is going to win, and one of them is going to finish the other. My pick is going to be Eric Anders via, I'm going to say knockout in the second round. So there you go. That's my pick for fight number 3 on the main card. Now moving on to the first interim title fight. This card features 2 of them, which is pretty rare these days. I don't know if it's ever happened before, actually. But the first one is between Kelvin Gastelum and Israel Adesanya. Now this fight could be very interesting in many ways. Israel is the much taller fighter. Kelvin hasn't been the hardest guy to hit in the past, but he does hit very hard. We haven't seen Israel get finished yet in MMA. He did get finished in kickboxing, but he had a very, very long kickboxing career, a very successful one. You fight enough times, eventually someone's going to catch you. So you can't really bring that into play when you're judging his MMA fights. This is a tough one to pick. As far as their competition goes, Kelvin Gastelum's been talking a lot recently about trying to say Israel hasn't fought anywhere near the level of competition that Kelvin Gastelum has. But let's keep it real. Kelvin fought Jacare Souza, who is a beast, no doubt about that. Definitely one of the best middleweights in the world. But he won a very close split decision. Who else did he fight at the top? Chris Weidman. He fought Chris Weidman, and he got finished by Chris Weidman. And let's be honest, Chris Weidman has not exactly looked good too late. He's lost, 4 of his last 5 fights, in which he got knocked out in, I think, the majority of those. So, who else has he fought aside from that? Oh, yeah, Michael Bisping. And that was Michael Bisping coming fresh off the loss to GSP, in which he got hit with a huge shot, and then he got choked unconscious. And he barely had any time to recover from that fight. He took the fight on short notice against Kelvin Gastelum. And Gastelum did catch him with a good shot, but Bisping has been knocked out in the past. And considering he had just had that rough fight against GSP not long before that, you got to take that fight or that finish from Kelvin with a grain of salt. So I like both fighters. I'm not going to lie. I just took those comments by Kelvin saying that Israel hasn't fought anywhere near the level of competition as he has. I thought those were, a little bit off base. Because Kelvin Gastelum he fought Derek Brunson. He absolutely destroyed Derek Brunson. He absolutely destroyed Brad Tavares. He didn't destroy Anderson Silva by any means. And Anderson Silva, although I believe he's absolutely the best middleweight fighter of all time, he's nowhere near his prime anymore, but he's still definitely a game opponent. And I felt like Israel respected Anderson so much in that fight that he was a little more hesitant than usual. I definitely don't think he's going to be hesitant like that in the Gastelum fight. So I think we will see a different Israel Adesanya, one that will be looking much more for the finish. He's not going to be as worried about the unorthodox style that Anderson Silva brings, because Kelvin doesn't really have that type of style. He has more of a plodding forward, aggressive, trying to land that power shot. He'll probably try and use his wrestling to land some takedowns, which is going to be the reason that this will be a very interesting fight. Because Israel, ever since joining the UFC, aside from maybe his first fight, which I think was against Marvin Vettori, his takedown defense from fight to fight has improved like crazy. He's been almost nearly impossible to take down his last couple fights. Kelvin has great takedowns, no doubt. But if he can't take Israel Adesanya down, this is going to be a very long night for him. Because even if Israel has a hard time finding Kelvin's chin, Kelvin does have pretty much a granite chin. I think he's been knocked down like once. He's definitely never been finished or anywhere even close to being finished. And Israel's not exactly known for his power, more so for his volume and his accuracy. So I don't necessarily see Israel finishing this via strikes, but he has amazing kicks. And he absolutely, in my opinion, will be able to find Kelvin all night long with his kicks. So my prediction is going to be this. Kelvin will land his fair share. Kelvin will definitely land a decent amount of good strikes. I think he'll put Israel in a little bit of trouble at some points during the fight, but I think it's going to come down to whether or not he can get the takedown, and I don't think he's going to be able to find that he can get the takedown consistently. I think he's going to wear himself out going for the takedown against the fence. He might get a few takedowns, but I don't think it's going to be enough to swing the fight in his favor. I think eventually Israel's going to catch him with something that hurts him and will make him even more hesitant to go for the takedowns. And after that, I think the fight's going to pretty much be a stand-up only fight in which I think that heavily favors Israel. I think Israel's just going to end up in the later rounds picking him apart. And I don't think he's going to get the finish, but I do think he will win a convincing unanimous decision after 5 rounds. So there you go. That's my pick for that one. Now moving on to the main event of the evening between my boy Max Holloway, the Hawaiian, and Dustin Poirier. This fight, like I said, is going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully I don't jinx it and something crazy happens, like an eye poke and, the fight ends up being a no contest or something. So knock on wood, that doesn't happen. But if all things go as planned, the way I see them going in my head, it's going to be a war. It's going to be a battle. And Max Holloway, I just don't think anybody, whether it be in the featherweights or the lightweights, can handle Max's pressure. His cardio is insane. It's unmatched. Nobody can keep up with him. Jose Aldo, without a doubt, is one of the best featherweights, one of the best fighters of all time. He somewhat hung with, his stand-up is incredible, right? And he somewhat hung with Max Holloway in the first 2 rounds of both of their fights. And then he got tired. Max Holloway took over. Max Holloway doesn't get tired. If anything, he starts increasing the pressure, starts increasing the volume of strikes. You saw that in his most recent performance against Brian Ortega. The first rounds, were somewhat close, and then Max Holloway just overwhelmed him and just started beating the crap out of him. It was tough to watch. I'm a Brian Ortega fan, also a Max Holloway fan. In the later rounds in that fight were tough to watch. Brian Ortega, that dude's got an incredible, amazing heart, but he was taking a beating. I don't think the Dustin Poirier fight's going to go quite the same way. I think Dustin Poirier definitely has better stand-up than Brian Ortega. I'm not sure who has the better gas tank. I think Dustin Poirier definitely has good cardio, but I don't think it's anywhere near Max Holloway level cardio. And, I talked about earlier in the video that these two fought before, and once it got to the ground, Dustin Poirier definitely had a pretty big advantage there in the grappling department. But I think in the 7 years since that fight, Max Holloway's definitely pretty much evened that up. Max Holloway has some good grappling. He's not the easiest guy to take down, and once he does get taken down, if he does, he gets up relatively quickly and relatively easily. So he's a tough dude to hold down. I don't think Dustin Poirier is going to be able to pull off the submission this time, which means I think it's going to be a stand-up fight. And in my opinion, that heavily favors Max Holloway. I think the first maybe like 2 rounds will be competitive because Dustin Poirier is a good stand-up fighter himself. But I think, as Max Holloway does to all his opponents, eventually he's going to overwhelm Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier is going to start running a little bit low on gas. And once Max notices that his opponents start to get tired, that is when he turns it up, turns up the volume, turns up the aggressiveness, and he just completely overwhelms everybody. That's what's going to happen again. My final prediction, Max Holloway wins via TKO in the 4th round. There you guys go. Those are my predictions for UFC 236, which goes down in Atlanta, Georgia tonight. The main card starts at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you don't miss it because this will be a night of fights to remember. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if you agree with my predictions. If you don't agree with them, drop those comments below. If you're listening to this on audio, head over to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/alldayMMA3 and let me know what you think about my fight predictions there. Anyways, enjoy the fights, enjoy your weekend, and I will catch you in the next episode.
My goodness! Oh my God! Just like that! That is some serious power! Wow!